All right. Hello, everyone. With the one and only Michael Huemer, who's now apparently going by the name Buy My Books. Or perhaps sort of his name is sort of like what the non-cognitivists claim moral statements are. It's sort of a command to
It's a
buy his
command.
books. Yeah. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about souls and the infinite. So two of the few topics that Mike is wrong about. So, yeah. So, okay. So, first question about the infinite. So, there's some scenario. It's sort of like the St. Petersburg paradox, but it involves a divergent series. So, suppose someone offers you the following offer. They say, something gives you on day one utility. On day two, it gives you -2 utility. On day three, it gives you 4, then -8, etc. And so, so this is a diverging series, specific thing that it tends towards. So how should a utility maximizer value that?
I don't know. I think this may be an impossible thing. There could be something that gives you that. So, because for one thing, I think like you have a limit to how much utility you can experience in one day, right? So, if somebody tells you that there's this thing that's going to give you that schedule of utility payoffs, you should not believe them.
Yeah. So you think the scenario would be metaphysically impossible?
Yeah, it might be. It might be impossible to have such an object. But even if it's possible to have such an object, it might also be impossible to be convinced that you had such an object.
Okay, yeah. So maybe so maybe it would be impossible to be convinced you had that object, but like it seems like there's a fact of the matter about how valuable particular things are. And I guess if you think that it's metaphysically impossible because there's like a limit on how much utility one can have in one day, we could just make it so that like rather than it being experienced all in one day, it's like 1 util a day, and then -1 utils a day for 2 days, and then 1 util a day for 4 days, etc. And we could also make this be with like disembodied minds or something, so that there like aren't problems with violating the laws of physics or infinite intensive magnitude.
Oh yeah. So you said, it seems like there should be a fact about how much value it has, but there might not be any total value, right? Because the total value is sort of like the value that has accumulated at the end of time. The end of time never comes. So there's only sort of like the amount of value that has existed at particular times, right? And so, there may only be facts about how much value occurs in particular finite time intervals.
Okay. Yeah. So wait. So if it's a metaphysically possible scenario, why would the rational response be to assign 0 probability to it? Or would it be to assign some probability, but just to assign no probability?
Yeah, I don't know. So, you might think that if it's metaphysically impossible, you might still not know that it's metaphysically impossible. So you might still assign a non-zero probability. Okay, but this requires a certain amount of imperfection, right? And so you might say, well, the ideal observer would have maximal credence in all necessary truths. So he would assign 0 credence to that. And you might also think that decision theory is sort of a theory for ideal observers. And, there might not be a theory for non-ideal observers. Right, because you might think things like, like in decision theory, you assume that people know the logical consequences of their beliefs, right? And it's like if the people can't deduce things, then you can't do the theory, right? But real people make mistakes even in deduction, so you might think that try to construct a coherent decision theory where you allow for people making logical errors. Like it's going to be pretty hard, right?
Yeah. So if an ideal observer is offered that gamble and they know all the relevant empirical facts, such that they have credence 1 in it, is there a fact of how much they should value it?
Oh, well, so I was bringing that up because the ideal observer might say, well, you might be certain that the scenario is false. So,
Okay.
so he
Oh, I see. I see. Oh, and so and and he would be certain that it's false because it's metaphysically impossible.
right, yeah.
And so why is it metaphysically impossible?
Oh, well, I mean, a thought was that there can't be an object that sort of like guarantees effects for unlimited future time, right? And so, and it's sort of like, the idea is that you could do something now that would have infinite impact, right? And larger impacts going further and further into the future, right? And maybe that just can't happen. And so,
Well, so do you think that there could be an agent that lives infinitely long?
I mean, in a certain sense, this ties into our other topic, which is souls. In a certain sense, I think that all agents are eternal, right? Except that they have separate lifetimes that are unconnected to each other.
Okay. Well, so yeah. So if all agents live forever, then certainly some agents live forever.
Yeah, there are at least some agents.
Well, I guess that's not an entailment, right? Because it could be that, but it is true nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Given that there are some agents and all agents live forever, then some agents live
yeah,
forever.
yeah. Okay, so if an agent lives forever, like, couldn't you just have it be the case that, I mean, so agents are born at some point, presumably. So couldn't it be the case that, like, on day one, agent, on day one, it has one utility, then the next 2 days it has -1, and so on.
Oh yeah, but by the way, they never come into existence, right? They're eternal in the past as well as the future
Okay.
direction. Okay, but you could say, well, whatever has happened in the past, starting now, they're going to have one utility and then -1 and whatever after that, right? And then you could have the question like, well, what's the total value of their life across all of time? I think there may just not be an answer to that. That might be indeterminate, so to speak. There's the value that it has in any finite time interval, but there's not the value that it has over infinite time.
Yeah. So do you think that it's like metaphysically possible for agents to begin to exist?
Oh, so I'm not I'm not sure that it is, because Timothy Williamson has some argument that all beings are necessary beings, and apparently this solves problems in modal logic. Right? Apparently the best theory of modal logic has all beings existing necessarily. Okay, but if you think about, yeah, well, so I already had the view that that all conscious beings exist eternally. If you exist, you existed forever and forever into the future. Okay, but your existence is not that exciting because for most of the time that you exist, you're completely unconscious, right? So, what exactly does your existence consist in when you're just a mind, but it's a mind that doesn't have any mental states, right? And then, well, it's something like it's a potential, it's a sort of like a potential to have experiences. And that's sort of like what your existence consists in. Okay, but then when you think about it that way, then it starts to sound more plausible that it's necessary that you exist. In the sense that you exist when you're dead, it's necessary that you exist, right? Like, there's nothing that could be done to remove you. Right, so
Yeah.
you could think of it as like, when there are experiences, they have to be had from some point of view. And so you can't destroy the point of view from which experiences could be had. You can just you can stop the experiences, right? And this is analogous to how you can't destroy a location in space. Right? You can remove the stuff from that location, but you can't destroy the location.
Yeah. So do you want to explain your basic theory of the infinite, involving tensor magnitudes and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a lot to say, so I don't know how much detail I should go into, but it appears that there are some kinds of infinity that are impossible, and it appears that there are other kinds that are possible, right? And the reason I say some of them are impossible is there are a bunch of paradoxes that result from imagining various different kinds of infinities, okay? So there's maybe the simplest one is Thompson's lamp, where you imagine that there's a lamp that it gets switched on after half a minute, and then after a quarter of a minute, it gets switched off, and then after an eighth of a minute, it gets switched back on, and so on. So it gets switched infinitely many times in 1 minute. And then you ask at the end of the minute, is it on or off, right? And this appears to depend upon whether infinity is even or odd, but infinity is neither even nor odd. Okay, anyway, so you want to say something like, well, that's an impossible scenario. But it also appears that some infinities are possible. So it appears that space is infinitely extended. Also, in Zeno's paradox, it appears that an object makes an infinite series of sub-motions in order to make an overall movement, okay? Right, good. So what infinities are impossible? So my theory was, well, it's impossible to have an infinite natural intensive magnitude. But it is possible to have an infinite extensive magnitude or an infinite cardinal number, right? Okay, so, and what are these distinctions? So there's cardinal numbers are answers to a how many question. Like the usual cardinal numbers are 1, 2, 3, and so on, right? And 0, okay. And then magnitudes are, they're usually represented with real numbers. Okay, so like the height of the Eiffel Tower and the temperature of this room and so on. Okay, so you can have infinite cardinal numbers. There could be infinitely many of some type of thing. All right, and then among magnitudes, there's the division between intensive and extensive. So roughly speaking, extensive magnitudes are additive across the parts of the thing that has the magnitude. And so volume is an extensive magnitude. So there's the volume of a region of space, and if you take the left half, take the volume of the left half plus the volume of the right half, you get the volume of the whole region. All right, so there's that kind of additivity. Then intensive magnitudes are not additive, like temperature. So if you take the temperature of the left half of the room plus the temperature of the right half of the room, you don't get the temperature of the room. Okay, all right, so anyway, so that's to explain what I'm talking about with intensive magnitudes. Well, you can't have an infinite intensive magnitude. So you can have an infinite extensive magnitude, like space is infinitely large. But you can't have infinite temperature, right? That would be an intensive magnitude. All right, is that enough?
Yeah, that's good. So, so one question is, it seems like maybe we can reconstruct Thompson's lamp while kind of avoiding this problem. So let's imagine that rather than having, a lamp that keeps being switched on and off, which would require an intensive magnitude, you have a disembodied mind, and it has a series of thoughts. And so, after half a second, it thinks on. After a quarter of a second, it thinks off. After an eighth of a second, it thinks on, and so on. So would that require an infinite intensive magnitudes in some way, or?
Well, it might. I mean, magnitudes don't have to be physical, so it could be a mental magnitude. So it could require infinite intelligence or infinite information storage or something.
Well, what if the information isn't stored? So it just sort of floats free. It just sort of has a thought after some number of seconds, but it doesn't keep track of the previous thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something like sort of infinite speed of the mind or something. Okay, but let's say what's the puzzle is supposed to be? It's like, well, so what is the mind thinking after 1 minute? All right, or at the end of the 1 minute. Well, then it looks like the answer is, you haven't specified. So, as far as we know in this scenario, it isn't thinking anything. So it's in a certain mental state, for the first half minute, and then it's in another mental state for the next quarter minute, and then etc. Okay, so you specify all that, and then what mental state is it in at the 1 minute mark, at exactly that point? no mental state. I mean, you didn't specify any mental state that it was in by describing that scenario. So maybe it won't be in any mental state. It could just be unconscious, or it could be in any mental state, whatever.
Well, I mean, suppose that at every point it is in a mental state that's either on or off, and then that's a function of the passing of time.
Well, so it's a mental state of thinking on or thinking off, and then you just stipulate that it has to be that at some time, right? But this is sort of like I ask you this question, like I say, there's an object that's either red or green. I'm stipulating that. Now, is it red or green? And then you have to tell me, like, well, you can't answer that because I didn't tell you, right? So it's like, so I mean, this is analogous to what Benacer says about the original Thompson's lamp, right? Except that I think this is a more plausible thing to say about the mental state version, because it, like, well, I mean, there's no reason why the mental state at the last moment has to be determined by the previous mental states, right? And we just sort of like arbitrarily stipulated that the mental states during the preceding minute would vary in a certain way for no particular reason, but then at the last instant it could be anything, right?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I think that in the case that you gave of the object that's either red or green, in that case, part of what's going on, you just don't stipulate, like, you don't stipulate the things that you're stipulating about the scenario don't contain the solution, and so why in this case would, like, I mean, it seems like it's, it seems like we've specified all the things that would happen, but then it wouldn't either be on or off. I mean, I guess maybe the thought is just that we haven't stipulated enough. But I don't know. I'm inclined to think of this case sort of like what you say in the book about the Benacerraf case, which is that the puzzle is not that, like, oh, it'll be on and that'll be contradictory. It's that the scenario that tells you the process that determines whether it's on or off for an entire minute leaves it indeterminate whether it's on or off.
Yeah. So I mean, you can have hypotheticals with indeterminate outcomes, right? And so what's the problem, right? So you're like, well, the problem is that when you think about the lamp intuitively, you think that its state should be determined. Like, from our understanding of lamps, or like our intuitions about lamps or physical objects, maybe more generally, the state that it's in at the end of a certain period of time should be determined by the state that it started in and what was done to it. Right. And then just with Thompson's lamp, there's just the problem that there's no way of saying what state it would be in on the basis of those things. And like, it looks like there's no good answer. All right. So, all right. But somebody says, okay, there's just like this disembodied soul. And I'm just stipulating that it goes through this series of thoughts. Okay. And then, and then that doesn't determine the thought that it has at the end. Well, that doesn't really seem that problematic. Like, so it could have a final state that wasn't determined by the preceding states. I don't really see the problem with that, with just disembodied minds.
Well, okay, so maybe we can make it more analogous to the Thompson's lamp case. So we can say, that it starts out thinking on, and then just every 30 seconds it stops thinking that, or not every 30, and 30 seconds and 15,
yeah.
It keeps thinking it again, and so it's like the thought just reappears and disappears, and like, I don't know. I mean, I think it seems similarly like if a thought reappears and disappears, that it will either have appeared or disappeared. In this case, determined by what goes on, even if it's like
I mean, you're sort of like you're making it sound like a puzzle by sort of treating thoughts more similarly to physical objects, right? Or like physical object normally has a state that's persistent unless something changes it, and like there has to be a reason why it changes. And so you might sort of like imagine mental states as being like that, but maybe they're just not like that, right? Maybe mental states stop unless there's something to make them happen, right? Or at least they might. So it might just be at the last instant that the thing doesn't have any mental state, right? Because there wasn't anything to make it have a mental state. It might be neither thinking on nor thinking off, right?
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So one other question is, so you talk about the St. Petersburg paradox.
Yeah.
So I mean, the like money version is, not that's not really much of a paradox, but the basic idea of this.
Yeah, Bernoulli solved that version right after he thought of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, so the basic idea of the St. Petersburg paradox, for those who don't know, is suppose that you have a coin and you keep flipping it until you get tails. And if you get tails on the first try, you get 2 utility. On the second try, you get 4. On the third try, you get 8, etc. And so then the question is, how much should you value it? And it seems like the answer is infinite, because it's a 1/2 of 2 plus 1/4 of 4 plus 1/8 of 8, which, if you add up 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 all the way to infinity, that turns out to be infinity. But then the following proposition is really obvious, which is that if you have 2 gambles and one of them is better in expectation than any possible outcome of the other, then it's a better gamble. But then that means that the St. Petersburg gamble is better than itself, because it's infinite in expectation, even though it gives you a 100% chance of being finite.
There's no occurrence in which you get the infinite payout out. They're all the possible payouts are finite. So it can't. Yeah. It's odd that it could have infinite expected value when you know that it will have less than that.
Yeah. So do you want to explain your solution to the St. Petersburg paradox?
Yeah. I have to try to remember where it was. So
I can remind you.
I claim that it's an impossible scenario, right? So yes, there's first the money version of it, the solution is, well, money has diminishing marginal utility, so right, and so there's a maximum amount of utility that you can get from money and whatever. And then and then I think you imagine this other version where it's like maybe you get promised days in heaven or something, like 1 day in heaven, 2 days in heaven, 4 days in heaven or something. And then my thought was that the longer the promise period in heaven would be, the less the likelihood that the promise would actually be kept. Right. So there's if it goes for 20 flips, and by the way, obviously, most of the supposed value of this game depends upon the possibility of long sequences of heads, right? Just head over and over again. Okay. Anyway, so
no matter how long the sequence is, you're always going to be disappointed. You get a million heads in a row, and you think, oh no, this was much worse than I expected going in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because you were hoping, Anyway, so, so let's say we're considering the outcome where you get 20 heads in a row followed by tails. All right, so then you're supposed to get 2 to the 20 days in heaven, which is a long time. Right, and then my claim is that, well, the longer the promise period is, the less likely it is that you would actually get it. Right, so that maybe God will renege on his promise at some point. Maybe the devil will overthrow God or whatever. Something will happen so that you won't actually get the thing. Right. Okay, and so so the probabilities are going to decline, faster than the probability of the actual sequence occurring. A million heads in a row, are you going to get 2 to the million days in heaven? And for real world rewards, this is obviously correct. If somebody's promising to pay you money, and then it comes up heads 20 times in a row, and they're supposed to give you 2 to the $20. they're not giving you that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, so there are a few worries I have for that solution. One of them is like, it seems like we could stipulate just that. It seems like there is a possible scenario where there's a 100% chance that they would get that, like, there is a scenario, there are lots of possible ways things could play out, where like the further you go along the sequence, the less likely it gets. So if you're actually betting, doing this with a money version with an actual bank, it's going to get much less likely the more times you get heads. But I don't know. I mean, so you say maybe omnipotence is impossible, but it seems like we could have a being that's like very powerful that can do two things. One of them is, first guarantee you n days in heaven, and then second destroy every other being in the universe, including itself, such that nothing can prevent you from getting the days of heaven. And that seems like a possible scenario. And even if you like sort of assign a low probability to it being like that, it still winds up infinite in expectation.
Oh yeah, so I think the being who can guarantee n days in heaven for any n, I think that has to be an infinitely powerful being, which is impossible.
Well, okay, so what if it's a series of beings? So there's one being who can guarantee you 1 day. There's one being who can guarantee you 2. One being who can guarantee you 3. One being who can guarantee you 4.
Yeah.
And we just ask whichever one is needed for you to be guaranteed that many days.
I mean, when you imagine sort of non-physical things, it's like it's hard to reason through, right? So my claim is that there's no way of making the scenario work, but like we don't know how supernatural beings work, okay? But if you imagine physical things, like if there are infinitely many of these physical beings, then basically they have to be farther and farther away from you, and then it's going to be harder for them to perceive what you did, right? Right. So something is going to, and it's going to take longer for them to find out what you did or something like that. Okay. And then there's going to be like, it'll be sort of like hard for them to detect the signal that's coming from you, right? To some point where you would start worrying that they would get the wrong signal and they would think that something else happened, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so two things. One of them is, can't we just make them increasingly small? So we fit, the first one's 1 meter, the second one's half a meter, the third one's a quarter of a meter, etc.
Yeah. I mean, there are some things like that, like Benedetti's paradoxes, right, where none of the particular things has an infinite intensive magnitude, but it's like the set does, right? So, you might wonder whether this counts as a real magnitude, right? But it's sort of like there's infinitely many powerful beings within a finite area, right? And so it's sort of like it's an infinite power density or something like that, right?
Can they be disembodied minds where they each sort of haunt an increasingly small space? They're just ghosts.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how the disembodied minds work. You might think, this is still infinite information density or something. Like
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Sorry, what would it be infinite information?
Like each of the minds has to have some information in it. Like they all have to understand the scenario or something like that. And then there's infinitely many of them and they're packed in a finite region or something.
I mean, maybe we can have them just not, understand the scenario. All they understand is that if, the coin is set up such that if it flips, the time paired with them, it alerts them and then they do the thing. So these are actually very sort of stupid beings. They just have just this sort of piece of knowledge. I don't know. I mean, working out the details is a little bit tricky, but this doesn't seem like a metaphysically impossible scenario if your view of the infinite is right.
Well, okay. So St. Petersburg paradox is, it's intended as a decision theory puzzle. Okay, so like, what's the decision theory solution? And then, like, my claim is, well, you couldn't be convinced that that scenario was true, right? So, like, the probability that you should assign to all of these elements, right? So, there's an infinite series of propositions, right? Which are, if it comes up heads the first time, I'll get a day in heaven. If it comes up tails and then heads, then I'll get 2 days in heaven. And conjoined with, if it comes up heads, tails, I'll get 4 days. Okay, whatever. So there's that whole infinite series of propositions. You got to believe all of those. Then my claim is you should assign 0 probability to that conjunction, right? Because it's like, yeah.
Well, I mean, if there's like an explanation of why, like, I mean, the same way that you don't assign 0 probability to the conjunction, pain is bad, and it's true that pain is bad, and it's true that pain is bad, etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's maybe because all of the conjuncts after the first one are logically equivalent to the first one. Anyway, they all logically entail, each logically entails all the ones after it. But
yeah. Well, so I mean, what about the proposition the number 1 exists and the number 2 exists?
I don't know. I mean, well, all these propositions are necessary truths, so I guess they all have probability 1. So the infinite conjunction is probability 1. But that the St. Petersburg propositions are all contingent, and none of them entails the others. So there should be.
I mean, couldn't you have some proposition that entails like them all? So you have the proposition that some really powerful being set things up such that all these begin to exist or something.
Yeah. So like it's not inherently, well, it's not impossible in probability theory to have an infinite conjunction of contingent propositions with a non-zero probability. But we just have to think about, okay, yeah, but what is the right way of assigning probabilities? Right. So you say, oh well, like maybe there was some powerful being who set up all of these things, and then my claim would be, yeah, there's probability 0 that there was such a being who did that. And why? Well, because if there was a godlike being, there's the probability that he would set up the first proposition. Then there's a probability that he would set up the second one, given that he set up the first. And then the probability that he would do the third, given the first. And you got to multiply all those probabilities together. So the probability that he would do all of them would be 0.
Yeah, but I mean, if there's one act that like does all of them, I mean, like it seems like the probability. I mean, exactly how the math works out is maybe a little tricky, but like it seems like if you do one act that that entails infinite things about the world, like, I mean, I don't know, would it be? It seems metaphysically possible to like create a pony in every meter of the universe.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, should we assign probability 0 to that?
Basically, yeah. So, but yeah, so I think like that is a thing that requires something like infinite power. Infinite power to be in a single agent, right? Which I think is impossible. Okay, now it's a little bit fuzzy because it's a little bit fuzzy to call power a magnitude, right? Because I don't know, we don't have a clear sense of how you measure somebody's power, right? But there is such a thing as somebody being more powerful than another. And there's such a thing as one person being more powerful by a larger margin than another person is, right? And so it does seem like it's sort of a magnitude, right?
Yeah. I mean, so one other worry for this solution is, so I mean, it seems like you can just keep raising. So I mean, let's say that you think that at each step of the way it gets less likely. So first it's 1/2, and then they say it's 1/4, but you think really it's 1/5, and so on.
Yeah.
It seems like you could just keep upping the utility to get
Right,
infinite in expectation.
Oh yeah. Well,
The
my
probability. Sorry, yeah.
my idea was that the higher the utility payout is, the lower the probability is. So like, right, the two are tied together.
Oh,
This is also
oh
the
yeah,
problem. This is also the problem with the Pascal's mugging example, right? Where this story, yeah, okay. So yeah, so the people who are advancing the Pascal's mugging puzzle say, oh well, you think that's really improbable, whatever. You think it's really improbable that I'm a seventh dimensional being who can create a quadrillion people and then torture them. But okay, whatever you assign the probability of that is, I'll just like increase the number of people that I can torture. And then it's got to be that, well, the probability of that being true decreases with the number of people that you're saying you're going to create and then torture.
yeah. So one other. So, assume the universe is infinite in size. It seems like none of our actions affect the total utility in the universe. But nonetheless, it seems like there's still a utilitarian reason to like not torture people, even if that doesn't capture all of our reasons. So, like,
that's right.
I don't know. Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, that's a puzzle, right? So like, well, that might show that one way of formulating utilitarianism is wrong, right? Like it's the view that you should try to maximize the utility of the universe. Okay, and then the utility of the universe is either infinity or negative infinity. Which, by the way, it is not obvious which of those is the case. It may be negative infinity, but either way, your action is not.
Couldn't be the case that there's no fact of the matter. Like, I mean, just like depending on how you rearrange things, you just get different results.
Yeah, I mean, people worry about this, but I mean, basically, you have to think, well, maybe there's a sort of natural way of aggregating, right? So, like, I don't know, starting from a particular space-time region, and then you imagine taking larger and larger space-time regions, and you think about, the total utility in the space-time region as it increases, and does that approach a certain amount? Does it, right? So, if maybe the utility approaches infinity as you take larger and larger regions, then you say the utility of the universe is infinite. You should not allow like taking the utility in a certain region and then going to farther and farther regions to take negative utilities to counterbalance it. Right? Like that's sort of like the unnatural way of aggregating. All right. So anyway, so like there might be a fact about whether the universe has positive or negative infinity utility. Anyway, yeah. So you're like, oh, okay. So like, I can't affect the total utility of the universe. So if I'm a utilitarian, like, it doesn't matter what I do. I can just do anything. Everything is permissible. And you want to say, no, that's not true. So like, maybe a reformulation of the view is, well, you want to maximize the utility of your own actions, right? And then that's assuming that your actions will not have infinite consequences, positive and negative consequences going forever into the future. You can imagine a scenario in which it looks like they would have infinite consequences going into the future, and so then there could be no fact of the matter. But fortunately, we're probably not in that situation, right? Because at some point in the future, the universe will reach thermal equilibrium, and so then the consequences of any of your current actions end, right? Okay, so like consequences of your actions are finite. They have finite utility, so you can still do consequentialist reasoning on that.
Yeah. So, so I mean, what about like in terms of axiology? So, like I mean, well, I guess maybe we can make the same move. So if we ask like, is a tornado bad? We just ask like, are the things affected by the tornado more good or bad?
Right, yeah, it's like it's convenient. So it's convenient that everything ends in heat death of the universe, because that guarantees that there won't be any consequences after that. Actually, there might be consequences, but they're totally unpredictable. So
yeah. So I mean, so one other question is, let's say that you have you have there are two states of affairs we're comparing. One of them has one person with one utility, two people, one person with one utility, one person with two utility, one with three, one with four, etc. And the other one has one with four, one with eight, one with 12, one with 16.
Yeah.
Which of these is better?
Okay, the second one sounded better.
Well, I mean, the first one contains the second one, right? But the second one is the same as the first one if you increase everyone's utility.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, so like there's people with utilities corresponding to all the natural numbers, and then there's another world with people with utilities corresponding to the powers of two. Is that the story?
Yeah.
And then yeah, so which world is better? I mean, yeah, there's an argument for each of them being better, right? Yeah, because you can pair up the people in the two worlds one to one, where in the second world, the person always has higher utility than their corresponding person from the first world. But then you could also do the pairing in a different way, so that it just looks like the first world has more people. Yeah. I mean, it looks like there's no answer to this. But then does that mean that there's no such thing as the value of that world? Maybe that's what it means. I don't know. And then, like, what should a utilitarian say? Like, what if we had a choice between the two worlds? What should we choose? Right? And then, well, basically, you can't have a choice between those two worlds because that requires you to have infinite power or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe. Or sorry.
Yeah, and then you want to say something like, well, but there should still be a fact about which of those worlds is better. They're possible worlds. They should have some amount of value. Yeah, maybe there isn't such a thing as the value of the whole world in that case. So neither is better or worse than the other.
Yeah. Okay, so neither is better or worse than the other. Assume you made one of them better. So, like, so they're both, neither is better or worse than the other. And then you make one of them better. And then they're still neither better or worse than the other.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You take the first world and then you give somebody an extra lollipop. So now the first world is better than the second one, right?
Yeah.
Because, no, still indeterminate, right?
Yeah, it seems like maybe you could construct a money pump. Now, I mean, this money pump's not going to be as forcing because you never actually lose all your money because you start out with infinite, or you lose the utility of the world. But so you start out with the first one. Someone offers you a trade for first one for second one. Or no, I guess maybe you'd say that's impossible.
Yeah,
given a trade for, but I guess maybe yeah. I mean, and so I mean, maybe you could construct sort of a weird version where it's not about the actions that you cause, but just about what you hope for. Where it's like you hope for A more than B, but you don't have any like preference between A, B, and C, assuming you don't know which of the worlds is the case. So, and so it's like, yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, but I don't know exactly how that would work.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can't make any of these worlds. So you're not making any actual decisions, but you have attitudes about them. It's like, okay, so there's, I guess world A is, the one with utilities of 1, 2, 3, and so on. Then world B could be the world with utilities 2, 4, 8, and so on. Then maybe world C is like world 1, except the first person has 2. It's like 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay. So then like, well, I've got no preference between A and B, but I prefer C over A. So then should I prefer C over B? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I mean, it matters if they're the same people. So if world B contains the same individuals as world A, then world B is better. So it's got to be that it contains a completely different set of individuals, right? And so then, and then world C has to contain the same individuals as world A in order for you to argue that it's better. If it contains totally different individuals, then I think there's not a clear case that it's better.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like you could, with the same individuals thing, you could make both of them are better than something that's equally good with the other, because you can pair up the same individuals in the other way by just having them, like the fourth individual and the eighth individual and the 12th individual and so on, all be the same individuals. In the other case, so in the case where you have all the numbers, yeah.
Well, but then you make the first world better unambiguously, right? Because it contains people that the second world doesn't. If I'm understanding what you're imagining. Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, here's one view about the infinite, and this is the view I have. So why is it wrong? I don't think you can have a concretely existing infinite thing. So, you can have infinite numbers, that's fine. You can have infinite, possible worlds and so on. But you can't have a concretely existing infinite. Why would we think this? Yeah. Well, one, it avoids all the paradoxes of the infinite. And two, it's like, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem when people claim that they have this really strong intuition that things can be infinite, it's sort of hard to believe. It's like, I mean, I've never seen an infinite thing. I can't imagine it. And it runs afoul of lots of very plausible principles. Here's a plausible principle. Suppose you have some number of bricks and then you get more bricks. The number of bricks you'll have at the end of this process will be more than the number of bricks you have before this process. And then the believers in the infinite who say it can exist say, no, this is false. And it's false because we can model it mathematically or something. Why would I accept that?
Yeah. So, there's something deeply puzzling about the idea of an infinite number, right? Because, it's okay. Before you ever heard about the infinite and whatever transfinite mathematics, I present to you this equation: x equals x plus 1. Okay, which one way of stating this in English would be so there's a particular number that is one larger than itself. Okay, solve for x. Right? And then on the face of it, you would say there's no solution. It's a contradictory equation. Okay, but actually, if you accept infinite numbers, then they solve that equation, right? So an infinite number is the number that's one greater than itself. When you add one to it, you get the same number. Okay, so that's a reason for thinking that it's impossible. And then you might think that means that there can't be an object that instantiates an infinite number. And what's wrong with that is just that there appear to be counterexamples. Okay, so it appears that space is infinitely large. It appears that time is infinite, goes on infinitely at least in the future, not into the past. And then it appears that even a finite region of space, like a finite extension, contains infinitely many points. Or if you don't like points, it still contains infinitely many subregions. So there's with this distance, there's the first half, and then there's the next quarter, and then there's the next eighth. So there's infinitely many things in there. So it looks like those are concrete objects, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so I basically bite the bullet on most of these. I don't really, so for the infinite future, I would agree that an infinite future would be real, or that the impossibility of an infinite future would be really weird if we were atheorists. So if we thought that, after some amount of time, heaven's been going on for a while, and St. Peter, comes in and says, all right, pack it up. We've had our time. Things have to end.
There's no more time. We're going to have to wrap up because time doesn't exist after this.
Yeah. But if we're B theorists, then, if you just think that there's sort of this temporally extended thing, then it doesn't seem obvious that, and, I'm a big B theorist, right? But, that would be sort of a longer discussion. Then, I don't know, the impossibility of an infinite future doesn't seem weird. And then for an infinite space, I don't know if I don't have an intuition about whether an infinite space is possible. And for infinite divisibility, I mean, I think there might be a way around it that's sort of complicated, but I'm also, I guess, just like happy to say that there's a smallest possible unit of space.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that doesn't seem intuitively right, I guess, but like that doesn't seem so intuitively wrong that
Yeah.
it's like I mean, yeah, that it's enough to like make it so that we have to give up the other things.
Yeah. Well, you know, what people usually say about space is, you know, somebody tells you that space is limited. Well, imagine going up to the edge of space, and then, you know, the edge of space is here, and then you just like stick your hand out, and then what would happen? It just seems like you would be able to stick it out. There's not going to be some giant barrier there that stops you, right? And you know, even if you imagine that, like, you try to stick your hand out and then just like it won't move further, you could. It still seems like you could imagine what's on the other side of this barrier, right? And like you can't imagine there not being another side of it.
I don't know.
Okay,
I can
but then
imagine there not being another side of it. I think.
yeah,
I think I'm
okay.
imagining it.
I mean, you know, like you can have a consistent mathematical description of a finite space or finite time, right? But you know, like so what? Um, you know about the divisibility of space. So I don't know, like most people are convinced by the argument from irrational numbers, right? Which is so like, well, most people will agree that there could be a square. All right, so there's a square, and then there's the length of the side, and there's the length of the diagonal, and they're incommensurable with each other, as they used to say, right? Meaning the diagonal is square root of 2 times the side. Okay, so now, and then most people who posit the discrete space theory will agree that it implies that the distance between any 2 points is some integer multiple of a minimum distance. And so then the side has to be an integer multiple of the minimum, and then the diagonal has to be an integer multiple of the minimum, which means the ratio of the diagonal to the side has to be a rational number, a ratio of 2 integers. Okay, but it's not, because the square root of 2 is irrational. Right, so like most people find this like a persuasive argument that there's not a minimum distance in space.
Wait, yeah, I'm not sure if I followed the argument.
Oh yeah, so I say that again. Right, so right, so you know, like the diagonal of a square is the square root of 2 times the side. Right, so square root of 2 is irrational. So the ratio of the diagonal to the side cannot be a ratio of 2 integers, right? And then, right, so agreed with that.
The ratio of diagonal times the side.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, diagonal over the side is square root of 2, so it can't be a rational number. So it can't be a ratio of 2 integers. Right, and then the thought was like the discrete space theory implies that the distance between any 2 points is an integer multiple of whatever the minimum distance is.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, I get the argument. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. I mean, I think maybe. Yeah, okay, maybe that's convincing. I feel like there might be a way to salvage to slightly modify the view to say that there can be, you know, space can get as small as you want. I don't know exactly how to work out the details, but like I think maybe the thought is something like you can't, for any like sort of like concrete stuff, you can't have infinite of it, and like dividing like a small amount of things into just increasingly smaller bits, that's like not a concrete stuff in the right kind of way. But I don't know if it, you know, a precise account of what I mean by concrete stuff in that sense. So I don't know. Yeah, so
yeah, I mean, you think about things like, okay, so like you said, there can't be a concrete object that's infinite, but you don't just mean that an object can't be infinitely large, right? Because to eliminate the paradoxes, you have to say something stronger, right? Like to eliminate Thompson's lamp, you have to have it that well, the thing can't do like an infinite series of actions or something like that. It's got to be, fairly broad. But or like it can't have any infinite attribute, right? But then, with Zeno's paradox, we learn that any object that moves does infinitely many actions. It appears, right?
Yeah, I guess, or maybe, yeah, okay. I mean, maybe what I would say about this case is that, about the diagonalization thing. Maybe I'd say that you just actually can't have a perfect square the same way that, like, you don't think you can have a perfect circle, right? Because, like, you don't think points exist, which I'm also convinced. I don't know what a point would be if it has zero size and has zero in all of the dimensions. I don't know in what sense it exists. Like physical things that exist, they seem to have size. And if it doesn't have size or length or width, then I don't know. I don't know what it means to exist.
Yeah, like how is it not nothing, right? Like I've got a part of space, right? But it's got a size of 0. Like that sounds a lot like you just described nothing, right? Like, as an analogy I give is like I've got some milk. Oh, how much milk do you have? Well, 0. It's like, well, okay, then you don't have milk. Stop lying. So yeah, so if you have the amount of space that you have is 0, then you don't have any space. So you have nothing. Okay, but anyway, okay, maybe we should go to sort of like, I don't know, what's, back to the motivation of rejecting some infinities, like what's weird about infinity. Like, so it's supposed to be a number that's larger than all the other numbers or whatever, larger than all the real numbers or larger than all the natural numbers. Right? And you're like, but it has these weird properties like being one larger than itself and, being twice as large as it is, right? Because 2 infinity equals infinity. So there's a quantity that's twice as large as it is. That seems impossible. Okay, and then there's this Aristotelian idea, which is that, well, infinitude is not a definite quantity. It's not a determinate amount, right? And then, so there are some there are other quantitative concepts that we have that don't refer to determinate amounts, like large. Large is a quantitative concept, but doesn't refer to a determinate quantity. And so that's why you can have something be large and then you can add something to it and it's still large. That doesn't work with determinate amounts. If something is like 4 meters and then you add another meter to it, it's not still 4 meters. Okay. So it looks like infinite isn't a determinate amount, but a number is a determinate amount. Okay. And then there's this thought that, from Aristotle again, that, well, every actual thing has to be fully determinate. So there can't be a thing that has some quantity, but there's not any definite quantity. Like a thing can't just be large, but not be a specific amount of largeness. And it's like how a thing can't be colored, but not have any particular color. It's got to have a specific color. So anyway, okay. So then, and that led Aristotle to say there can't be an actual infinity, right? Or you might say there can't be like a concrete infinite quantity. But then, it leads me to say, oh, there can't be an infinite intensive magnitude, right? Okay. And then why is that? Well, it's because I can explain what infinite extensive magnitude or infinite cardinal number means without postulating a number that's larger than all the numbers, right? Or larger than all the other numbers. Right. And so, right. And that's because, if there's a collection with infinitely many members, I can say, well, what that means is that it has subsets that are arbitrarily large. Like for any natural number n, it has a subset with at least n elements. And so by saying that, I don't have to say that there's a number that's larger than all the natural numbers. Right? And so like there's a coherent understanding of what it means. But I can't say something analogous if I'm talking about an intensive magnitude. Right. So I say that I claim that a black hole has infinite matter density, right? Which is true according to general relativity. Okay, infinite matter density. Well, I can't explain that without positing a quantity that's larger than all the other quantities, right? Because I can't say there's arbitrarily large members, parts, No, there's just like, because there aren't all these different parts, right? There's just the thing. So I have to say it's got more density than any real valued density amount, right? So I'm positing a number larger than all the other numbers. Anyway, okay, so that was the rationale for why it would be intensive magnitudes that are the problem.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, like, in the case of I don't know, like, just my intuition that if you have some amount of stuff, you get more stuff, you'll have more than you started with. It's like stronger than my intuition about, like, anything about, space, about whether space is infinitely divisible. Like, I don't know. I don't really have much of an intuition about that.
Oh yeah. Well, so in my view, where there can be some infinities, it's not that you have an amount of stuff and then you get more and it's still the same amount, right? Because there's no amount of stuff, right? So, okay, so like, it's not like, oh, there's space, and then if we created more space, we'll still have the same amount of space, because there's not an amount of space.
Well, okay, here's a plausible principle. If the number of x is not 0, then there's an amount of x, or I guess a number of x.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So so like there are some items, like, I don't know, like, if we believed in points, we could say there are infinitely many points, right? Or if not, then there are infinitely many, like cube-sized, there are infinitely many cubes of space of like 1 meter across. Well, yeah. So the thought is, like, there is not actually such a thing as the number of regions of space. That is, the regions of space are numberless. They're beyond number, right? For any number, there's more than that many. Like 100. Well, you can find more than 100, right? Or 1,000. You can find more than 1,000 regions of space, and so on. So it just goes that way forever. So there's no number.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think, the odds of it aren't 0. It does not strike me as that plausible.
Yeah.
But, I don't know. So one thing that, sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you might think, okay, so like I think, to make the answer be somewhat plausible, the view has to be like, there's no such thing as the size of all of space. Somebody asks you, what's the volume of all of space? You say, it doesn't have a volume. And perhaps you even say, well, there's no such object as all of space. There are finite regions of space, and they just go on forever. But there's not a single object that's all of space. And so that's why it doesn't have to have a volume, right? Okay, and then, say similar things about infinite sets, right? Okay, so like, there's no such thing as the number of natural numbers. The natural numbers are numberless, okay? And then, like, well, okay, you might be bothered by that because, I don't know, maybe you have an intuition that there should be a thing called all of space. But I don't find that all that obvious.
Yeah, I guess I have the intuition that, like, if you don't have 0 of something, there's an amount of it that you have. And your response was to give examples of things that I don't think exist. You're like, well, if there were infinite points, well, I don't think there can be infinite points for exactly that reason. And so, like, I agree that if I believed in the infinite, I would deny that principle. But I don't deny that principle. That principle seems more obvious than that you can have infinite concrete things.
Yeah. I guess, I don't know. Like, what are the most compelling examples of infinitude? I don't know. Like, most people find the infinite divisibility of space pretty compelling. Like, you have a region of space, you can cut it in half, and then you can look at that half and, like, why can't you cut it in half again? just seems that way.
Well, I think you could cut it in half any finite number of times, but then is it the case that it could, continue to be sliced infinitely? Like, there's a possible world where a region of space can be sliced any particular number of times. The idea that it can be sliced infinitely Like, I mean, like, I guess when I think about it at first, I think, that's probably right. But I don't have like super strong, like it's not like, well,
Well,
if it's like that intuition against the intuition that the world is either good or bad, and like how
yeah.
you arrange things doesn't matter, and that like that all these paradoxes that you maybe have to say weird things about. And maybe your solution avoids some of them. I still think there are some problems, some of which we've discussed. But like I don't know. I mean,
So, I
it's
mean, to clarify, like what does the infinite divisibility of space mean? So I don't think it means that you can divide up a region infinitely many times. I think it means that for any region you can divide it. That's it, and you can divide it into two regions. Okay, but then you could take the left region. It's also true of that one that you could divide it. Okay, so the alternative view would have to be there's some region that cannot be divided. And now try to imagine that region. Just like, what does it look like? Does it have a shape? Does it have a size? So if it has a non-zero size, I don't know why you can't talk about the left half of it or the right half of it. By the way, by dividing it, I don't mean actually doing anything to it. I just mean that you could talk about the left half of it and the right half of it, right? Or it has a left half and a right half. Does it have a shape? Because what would its shape be? Suppose that it's shaped like a cube. Well, then there are parts of that, right? Cube has parts. So, okay, it could be shaped like a sphere. No, a sphere has parts. Okay, so it has to not have any shape. Okay, so what the minimum parts of space are things with no size and no shape. And then I'm like, there's no such thing. I don't know. I don't know what that would be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I guess thinking about it more, maybe I think space is infinitely. Yeah, I don't know the divisibility of space. I think that's the one that I think is tricky. But I think the other ones, like, I don't think that they pose that significant of problems. Yeah. Uh. Okay. So, all right. Moving on to souls.
Yeah,
Um. You think we have them?
yeah,
Discuss.
yeah. We finally got to the souls. Yeah. What? Oh, yeah. Should I say what souls are?
Yeah. Sure.
Like, so it's a non-physical component of a person that determines personal identity, and also is generally supposed to be the subject of mental states. All right, so like you have beliefs and desires and feelings and sensations, whatever. Okay, and so this thing called the soul is supposed to be a thing that those things are states of. So, like when you have a sensation, that's an event or state of the mind, right? Also known as the soul. Okay. When I say it determines personal identity, I mean um, it answers questions like when A is the same person as B. So A is the same person as B if A has the soul that B has, and not otherwise.
Yeah. Um. Okay. So I mean, so yeah. So I mean, there are cases where I think a soul does seem sort of intuitive. So I mean, like consider the following case: the left half of my brain goes in one skull, and the right half goes in another skull. Uh, and then the question is, do I survive? Well, here's an answer that doesn't seem right. There's no fact of the matter.
Yeah,
It just depends on what we call things.
yeah,
But that's the solution I'm inclined to accept. And like it doesn't seem initially intuitive, but I guess when I think about it more, it like doesn't seem obviously wrong. And then I think that there are good reasons to give up the belief in souls. Um,
yeah, yeah.
um,
Like, yeah. I mean,
so
so like I don't know. I find it let's say intuitive that it's never a semantic question whether I exist. That's always a factual question. Now, to sort of pump your intuitions, like, okay, imagine that this operation was going to be done to you, and you think that it's a purely semantic question whether you survive. So now you have like super strong reason for trying to get other people to talk as if you survive.
well, I wouldn't. I don't think that's true, because I don't think that whether the victim of some event, whether they are you, matters.
Oh, okay. uh, So you don't care more about yourself than other people, or
Well, I
you
do
don't
as
have
a
potential reasons?
uh, I don't think. Yeah, I don't really think they're. I think like prudential reasons are maybe vague. Like, I mean, like I think prudential reasons maybe just refer to like the subset of like total reasons, or like total like normative reasons, like, or like moral
Yeah.
reasons, obviously not like epistemic.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Um,
okay. So you
but
might think that you have, yeah, you have exactly as much reason for helping a person if it's you as you do if it's someone else. And so it doesn't matter whether it's you or not. So you have no reason for trying to make that person be you, right? Is that the idea?
yeah, I mean, I get yeah,
Um, yeah, I guess I don't know. Well, let's just say most people think that there are prudential reasons, right? And most people care about themselves, more than others.
yeah,
So, well, I guess they're just like, um, it seems like there's a fact about, what I'm going to experience, if anything, after this. And like, what should I anticipate? I'm going into the operation. Should I anticipate this is the end? And, it seems like there's a fact. It's not just a matter of ways of talking. There's a fact that at least somebody could care about.
yeah. I mean, I have that intuition initially, right? I think basically everyone does,
Yeah.
but yeah, and so but then I mean, so here's I think my basic case against souls. Um, well, first I'm actually going to make fun of one other basic case against souls. Don't you know that all causes are physical? We've observed every cause in the universe,
Yeah. Yeah.
determined that all of them are physical.
Yeah.
We've done rigorous experimental tests on non-physical entities, and we've discovered that none of them ever do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. We tested the numbers. We tested the souls. They didn't do anything.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, and I do agree. I'm a non-physicalist about consciousness, just to be clear. So like I don't
Like
think
a
that.
property dualist, I assume.
Yeah,
Mm. Okay, wait.
yeah,
Can we like take a bathroom break for a minute here?
yes,
Like, BRB.
okay. Uh, Oscar. Um, so we talked a little bit about the St. Petersburg paradox earlier. Uh, and I think the basic claim is that, like, as if someone offers you a gamble where they say, as you flip more coins, it gets less, triple or nothing. The odds that what they're saying is true get lower and lower. Uh, so, um, so like as you flip more and more coins, like, there's some point at which you stop taking the deal because you don't think there's actually 1 in 3 chance of it. No, I mean, I don't know. My view is I don't think you can have an infinite number of flips. I think that you shouldn't flip indefinitely because then you have a 100% chance of getting nothing. But I think for any finite number n flips is better than n-1 flips. Okay.
All right. What did I
Um,
miss?
Well, so so someone just asked whether in the like triple or nothing thing. So if someone offers you a deal where they say if if they'll flip a coin and if you get heads, they'll triple the utility of Earth. If they get tails, you'll destroy Earth. And they offer you that deal again and again. How many times should you take the deal? And what I said is presumably your answer to that would just be that, well, I don't know, but it gets less probable that they're telling the truth each time. So eventually it stops being worth it.
I see. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Every time, so you take it the first time, right? So then, you got lucky. The Earth is still here, and they actually tripled the utility of the Earth. I'm like, wow, that's good. And you might think, oh, that's inductive evidence that they'll do it again. But I guess it has to be that there's just some point at which, in spite of the inductive evidence, just the improbability of their having that much power overcomes the inductive evidence. And so you start thinking it's less likely. I mean, according to utilitarianism, you should just take it every time. You just keep doing it. But you don't know if he's going to keep offering you the deal. So each time it seems like you should do it.
Yeah, assume. Yeah, we can work around this. So if you're a deontologist of some form, given that you don't think rights are infinitely valuable, like maybe you think that, like you need a real, like, to justify killing one person, you have to like create like 100 times as much utility as you don't bring about, and so then you just you just set the numbers to whatever they need to be to get the job done. Yeah. Wait, actually, one question about that. So it seems like you're sort of a moderate deontologist, which is sort of sad if you haven't given that up yet. But I'm optimistic that one day you'll join the ranks of the utilitarians.
Yeah.
You even proved that deontology is false with your paradox.
That's true. Yeah.
And then, like Parfit, you proved this surprising conclusion, and then you reviled your progeny.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, just like Parfit with a repugnant conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I can come up with a colorful name for utilitarianism. The horrific conclusion, utilitarianism.
Yeah, and then I can write a paper later called "In Defense of Horrificness" or something, or horror, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so wait, let's see. There was a question I was going to ask, then I.
What about souls?
Yeah. What? Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. I think the basic case against souls is like, okay, so I do sort of have the intuitions, like there's a fact about whether you survive, but then that seems like a fact about either what is experienced or what physically happens. And then you say, well, souls don't make any difference to either of those things. Like it could be that I lost my soul 10 times in the last 10 minutes and was replaced with a new identical soul. It's not likely, but it's metaphysically possible. And I wouldn't know. It wouldn't make any difference to the ongoing stream of consciousness. And in fact, our souls could have just been swapped out. Maybe that's impossible or something.
Well,
but at that point, it stopped seeming intuitive.
Well, okay, wait. So, if your soul, if the person in your body, if your body had one soul at the beginning of this conversation, and then halfway through, that soul left and another soul came in, neither of us would know that. It's not the case that would make no difference to your sequence of experience, though, because what that would mean is that you didn't have the first half of the experiences, and you only have false memories of having those experiences. So, it would mean that you're only 40 minutes old. Anyway, so there could be differences that there's no way of knowing. Okay, but I think like and you might find this disturbing or something, but there's something analogous about all objects, right? So like, this table in front of me could have just been replaced by a table that looks just like it, and there would be no way of knowing this. Like, but we don't think that that means that there are no such thing as material substances, right?
Yeah. Well, but in the case of, I mean, so like, suppose that you cataloged all the mental and physical facts, so all the facts about what was experienced, and all the facts and all the physical facts.
Do they include facts about who experienced each thing?
Yeah, I guess maybe the thought is, that like, they're not about what is experienced, but who's experiencing them. Right, but let's see. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't seem obvious that you can keep the experience the same, and like when it's experienced, it feels exactly the same. But then the person who's experiencing it is different. Like, I don't know. Yeah. That doesn't.
By the way, like, this reminds me of the sort of thought experiments that are supposed to establish that there are de se beliefs or something like this. So, okay, so imagine that you're sitting in a tower somewhere, which is, I don't know, either in China or in America, and you don't know where. And then God comes and he gives you a complete qualitative description of the universe. And that description includes there being a being exactly like you. And there's one of them in China and there's another one in America. Okay, and then, but he's giving you a complete qualitative description of all the states. Okay, and then these two beings have the same intrinsic qualitative states, but they can't see outside the tower, so neither of them can see where they are. Okay, and then it looks like there is something that you don't know, right? Which is, you don't know whether I am the one in America or the one in China. But notice that that's not a qualitative difference. Okay, like, those two possible worlds are qualitatively identical. Right, so anyway, that establishes that there are certain kind of propositions that are not exhausted by the qualitative state of the world, and also that you sometimes know them. I don't know if that helps, but anyway, so like, if there's a fact of the matter about whether you are the one in China or you are the one in America, then there's something that's you, right? Which is not just like it doesn't appear to just be the physical particles. And it's not just the qualitative experiences, because they both have the same qualitative experiences.
Yeah, I don't know. The thing that seems odd is you have like this chain of like psychological continuity, and it's like, okay, throughout this chain, you could have the solids be swapped out any number of times without it making any difference to the. Well, I guess I guess you'd say that it does make a difference. It makes a difference to who is experiencing it.
Yeah.
I guess maybe. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't think this objection's any good. Thinking more about it. I sort of. Yeah. I mean, one. Sorry, good.
Yeah, and I mean, isn't it just like the thing where, like that table behind you could have been swapped out any number of times, right?
Well, I mean, but that would make a difference to the physical facts.
I mean, not the qualitative fact, right? It just gets swapped for a qualitatively indistinguishable table, right? So it only makes a difference to which particular particles are in that location.
Well, wait. I mean, if the table is exactly the same, then it would have to be. I mean, I think like are all atoms the same or something? Like down. I don't.
Well, yeah. Okay. So I don't know. Let's say the table is made of quarks, and let's say whatever, each quark can be in one of a number of states. I don't know what their states are anyway. But you just like for each quark in the table, you find another quark somewhere in the universe that's in the same state, and then they swap locations. And so you get a table that's in the same configuration, but it's made out of different stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in that case, well, I mean, if they're swapping, then maybe that's a physical thing. No, yeah, I guess. Okay, yeah, no, I think this is right. Okay, I mean, so then I guess, I mean, what would you make of the kind of evolutionary debunking of souls? The idea, or of like our belief in personal identity. The idea would be like, um,
Yeah.
that there's like just a sort of plausible evolutionary account of why we believe in ourselves and in
Yeah.
prudential reasons and so on.
Yeah, I guess the story would be like, selfish desires cause you to produce more, more offspring or something. But to have selfish desires, you have to believe in yourself or something. Maybe. Oh, is that true? Like, do other animals have a belief in the self? Anyway, because, but okay, but anyway, I
Well,
mean,
I mean, it seems like other animals, at least, like maybe they don't have the belief in the self in their selves, uh, but like they have, like they act on prudential reasons,
yeah,
certainly, that like sort of like the things that determine what, like in what ways they act will be the thing that we think of as a self. And
yeah,
so the idea would be that sort of capacity just grows more refined.
yeah. I mean, well, like I feel like I'm just immediately aware of myself, and in a way that can't be undermined by somebody giving some theory. I feel like I have a more immediate and more certain knowledge that I exist than I do that the theory of evolution is even true, right? or any scientific theory.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think that's like an illegitimate move. Like, that's how I feel about the moral facts. It's like, it's way
Yeah,
more obvious that pain is bad than like any argument you appeal to, even to like say evolution is true. But
yeah,
I don't know. That doesn't seem obvious to me.
yeah. I mean,
No.
yeah, it's sort of like you imagine somebody giving you like an attempted debunking of the belief that two equals two. They're like, I think maybe two equals three, and let me explain why you would be mistaken about this. And then you just, well, it doesn't matter what you say about how I acquired the belief that two equals two, because I could just see that it's true. So
Yeah.
anyway, when Descartes was in the midst of his most extreme skepticism, he still couldn't doubt that he existed. Right? And,
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't think I can doubt that like there's consciousness at that moment, but it doesn't seem so obvious that I exist in
yeah,
any like robust sense. But I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah. This conversation has raised my credence in souls quite a bit because, like, I
yeah,
think my primary objection, now that I think more about it, I don't know. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, I guess it was just sort of like when I was reading Parfit and he was talking about the further fact view, it sort of seemed really convincing. But now thinking about it, I don't know. Like, it doesn't seem like there was much of like an argument that has any force. You know?
yeah, yeah. Like
Um,
I don't know what the problem is with souls. Actually, I don't know why people don't like them. Yeah. Why are people so down on the soul? I mean, look, I think the actual reason for most people is that they're victims of scientism. And, when they hear soul, like maybe I should just call it something else. Anyway, I'll call it the mind. When they hear soul, they think, oh, that sounds like religion. Um, and, I'm not religious, so I can't believe in that. And also, science doesn't talk about souls. So, there can't be any such thing. And then, those are just silly. Those are
yeah.
bad motives.
Yeah, science has established that all the worthwhile claims can be proved by science.
That's
We
yeah,
figured
right.
that out in a test tube.
Yeah, you heard about the experiment, right? Where they found that out, right? They did an experiment to see whether there were any non-scientific ways of knowing, and it turned out not.
Hmm.
Think about what that experiment would be like.
Yeah, it's always funny to read kind of like pop science articles where they're like, where they like, wade in on philosophical topics. Like, new scientific, new results in quantum physics show you can have contradictions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
I,
right. Yeah, I mean, like,
no, I don't think they do.
yeah, I don't think so. Journalists are, I would say, like an unreliable source of information about most things, right? And science journalists very frequently are not even smart enough to understand what the scientists are trying to tell them. But in addition to that, they're trying to sensationalize everything. So it's like they have a particular motive for trying to make it sound amazing, which often means making it sound absurd. Right? Like scientists tell us that A equals non-A, A not equal to A, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think that sort of mostly exhausts the things we were going to talk about. I mean, so one other question is, this is going to be a really hard one. So like earlier today, I dropped something on my toe, and it was very painful. And I was sort of wondering, is it bad? So like, is it false that it's bad? Or maybe does it like depend on other people's attitudes?
Yeah.
I don't know. This seems like a really difficult one.
Well, I would go out on a limb and say it was bad. And,
yeah, that just seems awfully strange to me. That just seems that it's bad seems too strange. To be part of the fabric of reality. Yeah, it just seems weird.
Yeah. The argument from weirdness is very popular among contemporary philosophers, and it works against so many things. Like works against moral facts, but also works against the mind, and it works against free will and abstract objects, and those are all weird. And so, anyway, it's worth examining what weirdness is, right? And why weird things can't exist. Because the argument, such and such strikes me as weird, and nothing that strikes me as weird could exist. So this doesn't exist.
Yeah, it also works against the infinite. That's another good argument against the infinite. If infinity were a number, it would be a number of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, one gloss on weird is it means counterintuitive. Okay, but then okay, so yes, the infinite is counterintuitive, so it's fair to call it weird. But then some of the things that people call weird are not counterintuitive at all. They're completely intuitive, right? Which is shown by the fact that some of the things that are called weird are things that almost everyone has believed in throughout almost all of history, and almost everyone still believes in, except for professional philosophers, and victims of scientism. So it's hard to say that that's counterintuitive, right? So moral facts. It's kind of hard to say that that's counterintuitive, when almost everyone has accepted moral facts. So anyway, and similarly for soul, right? Almost everyone still believes that they have a soul.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if almost everyone thinks they have a soul. I think, and I don't know. I mean, I think lots of people, it seems like if you poll people, lots of people say morality is subjective. But what I think is true is that most people have beliefs that are incompatible with morality being subjective. If you ask is torturing infants wrong? And then you ask follow up, is that because some people don't have a negative attitude towards it? Other than the infant, right? It's not the suffering isn't the infant. It's well, someone, maybe the speaker or maybe the society or something, is it because they have a negative attitude towards it? Most people will say, I think it's wrong. I think it's not because some people don't like it. So that's true.
Yeah, true or false, if we approved of torturing babies, then torturing babies would be good. I think most people can answer this one. Just like the rest of how people treat the issue. When they argue about a moral issue, so they're arguing about whether abortion is wrong, they don't appeal to conventions or attitudes, right? They don't go no, I heard about an abortion and I had a really negative feeling about it, so obviously it's wrong. Don't be stupid. That logically follows, right? They don't do that. Or they don't go hey, here are the latest polls. It looks like abortion is wrong.
Well, it's false that abortion is wrong, as is true but it's also false that it's right.
Yeah. Nobody thinks that. Only philosophers think that.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Yeah, this was fun. Have a good one.
All right. Good talking to you. Laters.
Yeah.